In a small town, nestled just beyond the busy lanes, stood an old house, quiet, almost solitary, like a forgotten relic of a bygone era. As the night unfolded, the family gathered in the warmth of their home, the flickering light of a single candle casting soft shadows across the room. The familiar smell of freshly brewed tea filled the air as the family sat, each in their own thoughtful silence. It was one of those moments that seemed to hold time still, the kind where the world outside disappears, leaving only the company of those you cherish. Yet, amid the comfort of this intimate gathering, their conversation wasn't about the trivialities of the day. No, this night, like many others, was spent reflecting on something far more ancient, far more enduring. The topic was an old, weathered stone, a tombstone, lying forgotten in the garden just beside the kitchen door. This stone, once part of an old graveyard, had a past that none of them could truly comprehend. Its surface was rough, cracked in places, its once engraved inscriptions worn to near obscurity. Over the years, it had been relegated to a mere object of utility. The kitchen staff used it to rest copper pots and pans after they were polished, and the children had made a game of climbing onto it and pretending to be explorers. Yet, despite its humble and somewhat neglected role, this stone had once belonged to someone long gone. The story it held was buried deep, etched into the stone itself, but only a few remnants of it remained visible. The stone is an ancient relic from the old abbey. The homeowner remarked with a deep sense of nostalgia, his voice carrying the weight of years. It's probably one of the tombstones that were once part of the abbey's graveyard before they dismantled it and sold off the stones for other purposes. My father, before he passed away, bought several of these stones, but this one remained. It has been here, in this yard, untouched for years. The eldest child, always the curious one, leaned forward, eyes wide with intrigue. I can still make out some of the markings. The child said softly, "Look, there's the image of a dripping hourglass, and what seems to be part of an angel. The rest, though, is hard to decipher. It's mostly faded, but there's a name, unwavering Swannis, and another letter, S. But the rest is too worn to read. Maybe, if it rains, we could clean it off and see more clearly." The mention of the name seemed to stir something in the room. The old man, who was practically a fixture of the house, his hands gnarled by age, nodded slowly, his voice growing faint with the passage of time. "Yes, that's it," he muttered, eyes glazing over as if lost in another time. "That's the tombstone of unwavering Swannis and his wife, Martha. They were buried in the Abbey's cemetery, long before it was torn down. I remember them. They were a couple that everyone knew. Generous, beloved. They were rich, oh, so rich, but lived simply, never wore anything fancy. Yet their tablecloths and linens were always spotless, white as snow. Martha was always so kind and obliging. He was one of those rare men who would give you his last coin if you needed it. I remember when I was a child how we would visit them. They would sit on the high stone steps in front of their house, beneath the old linden tree. They'd smile at everyone who passed by, nodding their heads gently, and you'd swear that no one was as warm-hearted as they were. The old man sighed deeply, his eyes becoming distant as memories flooded back. Martha passed away first, he said quietly, as though recalling a painful truth. I was just a boy, but I remember the day. Her body lay in the bedroom, and Oblivion was crying like a child, his face a mask of grief. I remember him talking to my father, recounting how they had met, how they had fallen in love. And in that moment, I could see the joy in his eyes, the memories of their youth. Yet there she was, lying still, gone forever. And he, too, had grown old, even though his words still held the passion of youth. He paused, his voice becoming quieter still. I remember the day she was buried. Oblivion walked behind her coffin, a man broken in spirit. They had prepared this tombstone together, inscribed with their names, but left the date of death blank. A year later, he joined her, lying beside her, the same stone marking their graves. The elder spoke with a tone of finality, as though all had been said, yet a deep sadness hung in the air. People said they left no fortune behind, no treasure to speak of. But those who knew them understood that their wealth wasn't in gold or silver. Their real treasure lay in their hearts, in the lives they touched. The children listened intently, their young eyes wide with fascination, each one pondering the weight of the old man's words. But it was the smallest child, with curious eyes and an inquisitive nature, who ventured to ask the question that hung heavy in the room. What happened to the house, to the linden tree, and the stone steps? The child's voice was soft, almost a whisper, as if afraid that asking would make the memories vanish like smoke in the air. The old man's gaze grew distant, and his voice lowered, as if he were speaking to the very air that surrounded them, to the memories that still lingered like ghosts in the shadows of the house. The house, the tree, the steps, all gone now, he sighed. The city tore down that old house years ago. The linden tree, the one that sheltered Oblivion and Martha from the heat of summer, was felled. The stone steps where they sat, so many summers ago, they too were lost to the ravages of time and progress. Everything changes. Time moves on, and things that were once cherished are forgotten or swept away. He paused for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The old abbey, where they were buried, too, was torn down. The land was sold off. The cemetery flattened. Obliven and Martha, their graves, their memories, all buried under a layer of earth that no one cared to remember. But the tombstone, well, that stayed. That piece of their life, it remained. Even after everything else had been erased. And now it's here, in this yard, forgotten, used as a place to lay tools and toys. Do you see? He gestured towards the tombstone in the garden, now weathered and worn, covered in dirt and fading with age. That stone, it was once a marker for 2 lives that meant something, and now it's just part of the landscape, part of the past, lost to time. The children stared at the tombstone, their faces solemn as they absorbed the story. The smallest child, who had asked the question, stood up and walked slowly towards the stone, his little feet dragging in the grass as if the weight of the past pressed down upon him. He reached out a small hand, brushing lightly against the stone's cold surface, feeling the grooves of the faded letters beneath his fingers. For a moment, it was as if the stone itself had become alive, whispering the stories of long-gone lives, of love and loss, of memories that had once been cherished and now lay buried beneath the soil. I think I can feel them, the child whispered, his voice barely audible, as if speaking too loudly would disturb the spirits of the past. The other children gathered around him, drawn to the stone by an invisible thread. They could feel it too, the weight of history, the presence of something that had once been full of life, but was now hidden away in the corners of the world. Forgotten by most. The old man smiled softly, his eyes twinkling with a hint of something both sad and knowing. Yes, my child, he said. Perhaps you do. You see, the stories that we leave behind, the ones etched in stone, the ones whispered in the wind, they don't die. They don't disappear. They are carried by those who remember, by those who care enough to look. In some small way, they live on, even when the world forgets them. And perhaps that's all we can hope for, that we are remembered, even if, just for a little while. As the night settled deeper, the family fell into a reflective silence, their gaze still fixed on the old tombstone, now bathed in the soft, silver glow of the moon. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves of nearby trees, but the garden remained still, as if holding its breath, listening to the whispers of the past. The small child remained by the stone, his fingers lightly tracing the faint markings, as if trying to uncover the secrets it held. The old man watched him for a moment, then slowly stood up, his joints creaking like the wind itself. His voice, now softer, filled the quiet room. You see, that tombstone, it's not just a stone. It carries with it the weight of years, of stories long buried. It holds the memories of a time that no longer exists, of two people who lived and loved, who gave and shared, who were so much more than what their stone tells you. Asterisk the eldest child, the one who had been the most curious, looked up from the tombstone, his brow furrowed with thought. But why was it left here? Why is it still standing, forgotten, while everything else is gone? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The old man smiled softly, his eyes distant as if lost in another time. Because, my child, some things are too important to be forgotten. That stone, it's a piece of the past, yes, but more than that, it's a reminder that the smallest moments, the simplest acts of kindness, can echo through the ages. Oblivion and Martha, they weren't perfect. None of us are. But they were real. Their love was real. Their charity, their generosity, and in some way, the stone and the memory of them is still here to remind us of that. The air grew colder, but the warmth in the room seemed to intensify, as if the stories shared around the table had built their own little world, keeping the night at bay. The children, entranced, sat quietly, listening to the old man's words. The tombstone, now more than just a forgotten relic, seemed to have taken on a life of its own in the moonlight. It wasn't just a stone anymore. It was a testament to love, to memory, to everything that had come before. Do you know what I remember most about them? The old man continued, his voice softening further. It's not the money they had, or the house they built. It's not the fine clothes they wore, or the meals they shared. No, what I remember most is how they made everyone feel. They made you believe that you mattered. They made you feel seen, even if you had nothing to offer but a smile. And that, my child, is the kind of legacy that lasts. It's the kind of legacy that even time cannot erase. The child, his small hand still resting against the stone, looked up at the old man with a mixture of awe and understanding. He felt something stir within him, something deep and unnameable. The story of Oblivion and Martha had become his story too, and in some strange way, he felt connected to them, as if the love they had shared all those years ago had passed through the stone and into him. Will anyone remember them? The child asked quietly, almost as if afraid to hear the answer. The old man sighed deeply, his gaze turning to the window, where the moon hung low in the sky. I believe they are remembered, just as long as there is someone to listen. Stories, memories, love. They don't vanish. They stay with us, in our hearts, in the way we treat each other. As long as we care, as long as we share those stories, they'll live on. The moonlight, soft and serene, bathed the room in its glow, and for a moment, Time seemed to stand still. Outside, the garden whispered in the breeze. The tombstone, lying quietly in the yard, its silent testament to the love it had witnessed. The old man's words hung in the air, like a promise that, no matter how much time passes, some things will never be forgotten. The room was quiet now, save for the faint crackling of the fire and the gentle hum of the wind outside. The children's eyes, wide with curiosity, were fixed on the old man as he leaned back in his chair, a contemplative expression washing over his face. He was lost in thought, as if the words he had shared had transported him to another time, another place. The moonlight filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the room, and for a moment, the world outside seemed distant and forgotten. "Do you know?" the old man began, his voice low and thoughtful. "That tombstone, it holds a secret that only a few will ever understand. You see, it's not just the names etched into the stone that matter. It's not the dates or the markings, though they carry their own weight. It's the space between the words, the silence that follows them. That's where the real story lies. The love that they shared, the sacrifices they made. It's all written in the spaces between the letters." The children listened intently, their gazes fixed on him, as though they were hanging on to every word. The old man continued, his tone now more personal, more intimate. "When Oblivion and Martha walked this earth, they didn't know how their lives would end. Just like we don't. But they lived with purpose. They lived with kindness. And that is the kind of life that endures, even when everything else fades away." The youngest child, still sitting by the window, turned towards the old man with a deep sense of wonder in his eyes. "But why? Then, did people forget them? Why did the tombstone end up here, gathering dust in the yard?" The old man smiled softly, his eyes twinkling in the dim light. "Oh, my child, you've asked a very good question. You see, people tend to forget what they think they no longer need. We forget the things that no longer serve us, the things that no longer seem important in the rush of life. But that doesn't mean they're gone. Oh no. As long as someone remembers, as long as someone holds on to those stories, they can never truly be forgotten." He paused for a moment, looking out the window at the tombstone, which now appeared to glow faintly under the moon's light. The world keeps moving forward, always changing. But that stone, that reminder, will remain. It will keep telling its story over and over again to those who are willing to listen. The fire crackled again, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, as if time itself was slowing down to absorb the weight of the words spoken. The children sat in reverent silence, contemplating the truth of what had just been shared. They could feel the presence of Oblivion and Martha, not as distant figures from a forgotten past, but as real, living beings whose legacy continued to pulse through the very air around them. Outside, the moonlight bathed the tombstone in a soft, ethereal glow. It was as though the stone itself was quietly alive, holding the memories of a love that had transcended time. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest trace of the past, a distant echo of the lives that had once been and would never truly be gone. The silence in the room grew heavier as the children allowed the weight of the old man's words to sink in. Outside, the wind had softened, and the faint rustling of the leaves became a gentle, rhythmic sound, almost like the world was breathing in unison with them. The moonlight that bathed the tombstone now seemed to have a deeper significance, as if it were a beacon, guiding them towards something intangible yet profoundly important. The youngest child, still gazing out at the old stone, slowly stood up, his small hand pressing against the cool glass of the window. "So, you mean the tombstone isn't just a stone at all? It's more than that." The old man's voice was quiet but full of conviction. As he nodded, "Yes, my dear. It's a testament, a keeper of memories, a quiet guardian of the love and the life that once was. It speaks in ways that the living can sometimes miss. If you listen closely enough, you can hear the whispers of those who have passed, like echoes in the wind." The child's face lit up with a sudden realization, as though a veil had been lifted, revealing a hidden truth. He turned to look at the other children, his eyes bright. "Does that mean everyone who's gone has a story like this?" The old man smiled, his wrinkled hands folding in front of him as he leaned back in his chair. "Every single one. No one is ever truly forgotten, not as long as their story remains in the hearts of those who knew them and in the places they loved. The stone may be silent, but the story is alive in us, in the memories we carry and pass on, in the way we remember them." For a moment, there was another silence, but it was different this time. It was a reflective silence, filled with understanding, as though each child had come to an unspoken agreement with the gravity of the words. Then, as if by some unspoken cue, the eldest child stood up and walked over to the window. He stared out at the moonlit garden, where the tombstone now seemed to glow even more brightly. "Do you think one day people will forget us, too?" he asked, his voice soft yet full of a question that seemed to hang in the air. Waiting for an answer, the old man didn't immediately respond. Instead, he stood up slowly, his gaze moving from the children to the tombstone outside. The night had grown still, and the world seemed to pause for a breath, as if acknowledging the weight of the question. "Perhaps," the old man said slowly, his voice carrying the wisdom of many years. "But even if they do, The story will remain, passed on in ways we cannot predict. Love and kindness, those things have a way of living on. They're like the roots of a tree, spreading beneath the surface long after the branches have fallen. And one day, perhaps someone will stop by and ask, who were they? And the answer will come, not from a name on a stone, but from the hearts of those who remember. The children stood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The youngest, one whose mind was still wrapping around the idea of stories that never really end, walked back toward the window, looking once more at the tombstone. His hand was pressed against the glass, and his eyes reflected the quiet glow of the moonlight. And in that moment, it felt as though the stone, the garden, the house, all of it was holding its breath, waiting for something more to be understood, as if time itself had paused for a heartbeat. And the story of Oblivion and Martha, the love they shared and the legacy they left, was no longer just a memory. It was a living, breathing part of the present, carried on through the whispers of the past. Outside, the night held a profound stillness. The tombstone stood in the garden, bathed in moonlight, as if it had always been there, waiting, timeless and patient. It was no longer just a marker of death. It had become a symbol of life, love, and memory, standing as a quiet reminder of all that had come before. The quiet, contemplative mood that had settled in the room lingered for a while. The children's eyes remained focused on the window, where the tombstone stood like a silent sentinel under the watchful gaze of the moon. The night seemed to stretch out, becoming endless, as if time itself had softened, becoming fluid and timeless. The youngest child, who had been so eager to ask questions, now looked up at the old man, his voice small but filled with a sense of wonder. Do you think we'll be remembered like they are, even when we're gone? The old man, who had spent so many years observing life from his quiet corner of the world, paused before answering. His gaze drifted from the children to the garden outside, where the tombstone cast long shadows in the moonlight. He seemed to be searching for the right words, his mind weighed down by the gravity of such a simple yet profound question. "Yes," he said at last, his voice steady, yet carrying a soft, almost wistful tone. "I believe we will be. Not in the way we might hope, not in the grand gestures or the loud declarations that we often crave, but in the small, quiet moments, in the way we touch the lives of others through love, kindness, and the little things we do every day. That is how we are remembered, not by monuments or engravings, but by the ripple we create. Even in the smallest act of grace." The eldest child, who had always been the one to ponder deeply, turned away from the window, his expression thoughtful. "But what if no one remembers? What if all that we do is forgotten, lost to time, like the names on the tombstone? The old man smiled gently, as if he had heard this concern before, from many different voices over the years. It is true, my dear, that time can erase names and faces, but even in that erasure, there is a legacy. The love you give, the kindness you show, those are the things that live on quietly and unnoticed in the hearts of others. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all we need. The children were silent for a while, absorbing the weight of his words. The soft breeze outside rustled the leaves, adding a touch of life to the stillness. The youngest one, still holding on to the idea that something as small as a single action could echo through time, leaned against the windowsill, his face thoughtful. The old man continued, his voice becoming more reflective, almost as if he were speaking to himself as much as to the children. We often look for the big moments, the grand gestures, the things that make us stand out. But in the end, it is the quiet things that matter, the way we show up for others, the small acts of love that pass unnoticed, the way we make someone feel. These are the things that last, even when everything else fades. Outside, the moonlight flickered gently on the old tombstone, casting long shadows across the garden. It seemed to glow with a quiet light, as if it held within it the stories of countless lives. It was no longer just a stone, it was a living testament to love, to memory, to the quiet passing of time. And in that moment, as the old man's words hung in the air like the last echo of a forgotten song, the children felt the weight of their own place in the world. They, too, would leave a mark, small, perhaps, but meaningful. They, too, would pass through the world quietly, but they would be remembered, not by monuments, but by the love they gave, the kindness they spread, and the lives they touched along the way. As the old man's words hung in the air, the room fell into a contemplative silence. The children, though young, seemed to understand, perhaps not fully, but enough to let the gravity of it seep into their hearts. The moonlight outside continued to bathe the tombstone in its soft, ethereal glow, almost as if it, too, was listening to the quiet wisdom being shared inside the room. The eldest child, with his brows furrowed in thought, broke the silence. "Do you think, grandfather, that the tombstone remembers?" he asked, his voice tentative but curious. "Does it hold the stories of those who have passed, waiting to tell them to anyone who will listen?" The old man chuckled softly, a warm sound that seemed to fill the room with a sense of comfort. He placed his hand on the child's shoulder, his touch light yet full of the affection that only comes with age and experience. "That's an interesting question," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Perhaps the stone does remember, in its own way. Maybe it holds the essence of those who lie beneath it, their love, their laughter, their sorrow, their hope. After all, it stands witness to their passing. It marks their place in the world. In a way, it carries their memory, even when the world around it changes. The youngest child, still perched by the window, looked out into the night, his mind spinning with the images of the tombstone, the stories it might hold, and the way the old man's words seemed to give it life. But what happens when the stone is forgotten? He asked softly, almost as if speaking to the stone itself. When no one is left to remember the people it marks, what becomes of their story? The old man's eyes softened as he gazed at the tombstone in the moonlight. Ah, that's the mystery, isn't it? He said, his voice tinged with a quiet sadness. The stone may be forgotten, but the story, well, the story never truly fades. It lives on in the hearts of those who remember. And as long as someone remembers, no one is truly forgotten. Maybe it's the love and the lives lived that make the story eternal. Maybe the story lives in the small moments, the ones that don't always get told but are felt. The moon continued to rise higher in the sky, its light now casting a long, soft shadow over the tombstone. For a moment, everything seemed still, as if the entire world had paused, holding its breath. And then, as if on cue, the breeze shifted, gently stirring the trees outside. It was as if nature itself was responding to the old man's words. The leaves rustled, the air grew cooler, and the faintest whisper of a song seemed to dance through the room. Though no one could say from where it came, it was as if the tombstone, the garden, the night itself was speaking, telling stories of lives once lived, of love once shared, and of memories that would never truly be lost. The children, in their quiet way, seemed to understand. They felt the weight of the truth in the old man's words, but they also felt a lightness, a peace that had settled over them like a soft blanket. They, too, would carry their stories, and in doing so, they would keep the memory of those who came before. Them alive. The youngest child looked at the tombstone one last time, and as he did, he smiled softly. "I think," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "that the stone will never be forgotten. Not really. Not if we remember." The old man nodded, his eyes twinkling with quiet approval. "Exactly," he said. "The stone may weather with time, but the love, the memories, the stories, they will always live on. In us, in the world around us, and in every little thing we do." And as the night stretched on, the moonlight shining softly through the window, the children rested, in the quiet knowledge that the stories of the past would never truly fade away. They would live on in them, in the way they loved, in the way they cared, in the way they remembered, and that the old man knew, was the most beautiful legacy of all. As the night deepened, the silence in the room became more profound, yet there was a comforting warmth that seemed to surround them all. The children, nestled in the safety of their home, found their thoughts lingering on the old tombstone, the stories it might hold, and the silent witness it had been to so many lives. It was as though the air itself had thickened with the presence of those who had passed. And yet, it wasn't a sorrowful thing. It was as if the very walls of the room were imbued with the love and memories of generations gone by, stretching out across time. The youngest child, still seated by the window, leaned forward slightly, his small hands pressed against the cool glass, staring out into the moonlit night. He could almost feel the weight of the tombstone in the air, as though it were calling to him, urging him to listen closely. In the soft murmur of the wind and the rustling of the trees, he could almost hear a voice, gentle and distant, like the echo of a long-forgotten story. He felt an inexplicable connection to it, as if the stone was not just an object of cold granite, but a living testament to all that had come before. What do you think they would say to us? Grandpa, the youngest child, asked quietly, his voice tinged with curiosity. The people buried there, beneath the stone. What would they say if they could speak to us? The old man, who had been lost in his own thoughts, turned his gaze toward the child. His expression softened, and there was a faraway look in his eyes, as though he were glimpsing something from a distant time, a time long past, but never fully gone. After a scar, he murmured, his voice low and thoughtful. Perhaps they would tell us to live fully, to love deeply, and to remember the small moments, the ones we often forget in the rush of life. Perhaps they would remind us that while time moves on, love does not fade, and that we should cherish each day. For it is a gift that we will one day give to those who come after us. The child nodded slowly, his young mind processing the weight of the words. He didn't fully understand all the complexities of life and death, of memories and legacies, but he understood this: the stone, the stories, the love, it all mattered. It was part of the fabric of life itself, woven through the years, binding people together across generations. The eldest child, who had been quiet until now, spoke up, his voice steady and serious. Grandpa, do you think the stone will always be there, even when we're gone, when the house is gone and the trees are gone? Will it still stand, still remember? The old man looked out the window, his gaze drifting over the moonlit garden, the trees casting long shadows in the quiet night. He smiled softly, his eyes twinkling with a mixture of wisdom and warmth. I believe it will, he said, his voice gentle but firm. The stone, like the memories it carries, will endure. Time may weather it, but the stories within it will remain, passed down through the ones who come after. As long as someone remembers, it will never truly be gone. The room seemed to hold its breath as the weight of his words settled over them. The moonlight streamed in through the window, casting a soft, silvery glow over the children's faces. It was a light that seemed to hold all the answers, all the unspoken truths of life. And in that moment, the children understood, in their own way, that the stories of the past were not just in the words spoken or the monuments left behind. They were in the hearts of those who remembered, in the way they lived, loved, and cherished the small moments. Outside, the wind shifted, and the trees whispered softly to one another. The stars, distant and endless, shone down on the earth, their light a quiet reminder of the vastness of time and the fleeting nature of life. And yet, within that vastness, there was beauty, there was meaning, and there was love. The love that bound the past to the present, the living to the dead, and the stories to the stone. As the night deepened and the children began to grow sleepy, the old man's voice, soft and steady, filled the room once more. Remember, he said, his words a final whisper in the night, that everything we do, every choice we make, is part of the story. We are writing it as we live, leaving our mark on the world for those who come after. And the love we give well, that will never be forgotten. The children, their eyes heavy with sleep, nodded softly. The warmth of the room, the comfort of the old man's words, and the quiet presence of the tombstone outside filled them with a sense of peace. They didn't need to understand it all now. They didn't need to grasp the fullness of the story, but they knew, deep within their hearts, that the stories of the past were not just for the past. They were for the future, for them, and for all who would come after. And as they drifted off to sleep, the old man, too, felt a quiet peace settle over him. The stories would live on, passed down like the steady flow of time, never forgotten, always remembered, and in that peace, there was the quiet certainty that the stone, like the love it carried, would endure. The morning sun began to break through the gentle curve of the horizon, casting its golden rays over the landscape, warming the earth with its soft embrace. In the quiet of the early hours, the old man stood by the window, his gaze lingering on the tombstone outside, the stone that had become the quiet keeper of so many stories. The children, still wrapped in the warmth of their dreams, lay peacefully, asleep, their faces calm and content. But the old man, who had lived through so many seasons, so many changes, could not help but think about the passage of time, the ebb and flow of life, the fleeting moments that left behind echoes and memories, like footprints in the sand. He had seen it all, the joy and the sorrow, the births and the deaths, the love and the loss. Yet in all of it, there was a thread that connected everything together. A thread that stretched through the years and tied the past to the present. The tombstone, standing there in the garden, was a symbol of that thread, a reminder of the lives that had come before, the stories that had been lived, and the love that had been shared. The old man's thoughts wandered back to the time when the tombstone had first been placed in the garden. It had been many years ago, long before the children were born, when the world was a different place. Back then, the house had been full of life, full of laughter, full of the kind of love that only families could share. He remembered the stories they had told, the meals they had shared, the days spent working in the garden and enjoying the simple pleasures of life. But now, all of that seemed so distant, as if it belonged to another time, another life. The world had changed. The children were growing up, their lives taking them in different directions, away from the house and the garden that had once been their sanctuary. The tombstone, however, remained silent, steadfast, and enduring, just as it always had been. It had witnessed the passing of generations, the changing of seasons, and the fading of memories. Yet it stood there, unmoved, a symbol of constancy in an ever-changing world. The old man closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the sun wash over him. He could hear the gentle rustling of the leaves outside, the soft whisper of the wind as it passed through the branches of the trees. It was a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years, the weight of time itself. And in that sound, he could hear the voices of those who had come before him, the voices of the ones who had loved, who had lived, and who had left their mark on the world. He thought of the stories they had told, the lessons they had taught, and the way they had lived their lives with such purpose and meaning. And he realized, with a quiet certainty, that their stories would never truly be forgotten. They would live on, carried in the hearts of those who remembered, passed down through the generations like a cherished heirloom. The old man turned away from the window and looked down at the children, their faces peaceful in sleep. He knew that they would one day carry these stories forward, just as he had. They would grow, they would live, and they would love. And when their time came, they would leave behind their own mark on the world, a mark that would be remembered, just as he had remembered the stories of the past. For in the end, it wasn't the tombstone that mattered. It wasn't the stone or the name engraved upon it. It was the love, the stories, and the memories that it represented. It was the way the lives of those who had come before had shaped the world, had shaped him, and would continue to shape the generations that followed. As the first light of day filled the room, the old man smiled softly, knowing that the stories, like the love they carried, would never fade. They would live on, forever etched in the hearts of those who remembered, forever passed down through the generations, like a timeless song. And in that song, there was a quiet, enduring beauty, an eternal reminder that no matter how much time passed, no matter how much changed, love would always remain. The day grew older, its warmth settling gently into the earth. But the old man's thoughts lingered on the memories that danced like shadows in his mind. As the children awoke and began their morning routines, their laughter filling the house, he couldn't help but feel the bittersweet pull of time, how quickly it passed, how easily it slipped through their fingers. He watched as they ran outside, the sunlight catching in their hair, the world still full of possibility. The tombstone in the garden seemed distant now, almost a forgotten relic in the light of the day's promise. But in the old man's heart, it remained at the center of everything. He made his way outside, the cool earth beneath his feet grounding him as he approached the stone. The children had long since forgotten the old stories he used to tell them, stories of love, loss, and the quiet endurance of those who had come before. Their world, it seemed, was in the present, full of laughter and dreams of the future. But the old man still held onto the past, still carried the weight of those silent stories that had shaped his life and the lives of those who had loved him. As he stood there, his fingers brushing over the worn surface of the tombstone, he thought about the life of the couple it memorialized. Their story, too, had once been full of life, of love shared in quiet moments, of promises made in the hush of the night, of joy found in the simple things. He could almost see them now, the way they had walked together, hand in hand, their faces soft with the kind of affection that only comes with years of shared experience. The old man smiled softly as memories of them returned, memories of the kind of love that never asked for recognition, that never demanded anything in return, but simply was. It was the kind of love that lives on long after the people who shared it are gone, carried forward by the hearts of those who remember. And in that love, he found solace. In the quiet of the garden, with the tombstone standing watch over the years, he realized that the love of the past had not truly passed, it had merely changed, become something else, something that could never truly be lost. The sound of the children playing in the distance, their voices rising in happy shouts, reminded him that life continued, that the world would always turn, bringing with it new generations, new stories, and new opportunities to love and be loved. The old man had lived his time, and now it was their turn, the children, their children, and those who would come after. And as long as the stories were remembered, as long as the love was passed down, the tombstone would serve as a quiet witness to all that had come before. He turned back to the house, his heart light, his thoughts peaceful, The world outside was full of noise and movement, but inside there was a quiet stillness that came from knowing that life, in all its fleeting beauty, was not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. He had lived, he had loved, and now it was time to let go. The memories of the past would live on, passed down through the generations. Like the stories that had shaped him. And so, the old man returned to the warmth of the house, where the children were waiting for him, their laughter filling the air. And in that laughter, he heard the echoes of the past, the voices of those who had come before, whispering their love into the future. The tombstone in the garden, still standing in quiet vigil, seemed to smile along with him, knowing that no matter how much time passed, no matter how much the world changed, love would always remain, enduring through the years, forever etched in the hearts of those who remembered. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the garden, the old man sat down in his favorite chair by the window, his gaze drifting towards the garden where the tombstone stood silently. The children, their laughter still echoing in the distance, seemed so alive, so full of hope. And yet the old man knew that one day they too would grow old, just as he had. The years would pass, just as they always had, and the tombstone would remain an unspoken testament to the love that had once bloomed in the hearts of two people long gone. It was strange, he thought, how something as simple as a stone could hold so much meaning. It was just a piece of granite, after all, weathered by time and etched with names and dates that few people would ever remember. Yet, it held within it the echoes of a lifetime, a life that had once been full of joy and sorrow, of beginnings and endings, of love shared and lost. And now, it stood as a silent witness to the passage of time, to the generations that had come and gone, each one leaving its mark on the world. Just as the couple had, the old man's mind wandered back to those early days, to the moments when he had first met the couple whose names were carved into the stone. They had been young then, full of dreams and hopes for the future, just as the children were now. He had watched them grow older, seen the love between them deepen with each passing year, and had marveled at their quiet strength, their unwavering devotion to one another. They had been simple people, but their love had been extraordinary, something that had stood the test of time, something that had outlasted even the hardships of life. Now, as he sat there, alone in the fading light of the day, the old man realized that love was not something that could be contained in a tombstone or in the pages of a book. It was something that lived on in the hearts of those who remembered, in the stories that were passed down through the generations, in the quiet moments of reflection that marked the passage of time. And as long as those memories lived on, as long as the love was remembered, The tombstone would continue to stand, a silent testament to the enduring power of love. The old man closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of the years on his shoulders, but also feeling a sense of peace. The world outside was changing, but in his heart, he carried with him the love of the past, the love of the couple whose names were etched in stone. It was a love that had transcended time, transcended death, and had become a part of him, a part of the world, a part of the stories that would live on long after he was gone. As the evening settled in, the children came running back into the house, their faces flushed with the joy of the day. They gathered around him, eager to share their stories, their laughter filling the room once again. And in that moment, the old man knew that the love he had witnessed, the love that had shaped his life, would live on in them, in their children, in the stories they would one day tell. And the tombstone, still standing in the garden, would continue to watch over them all, a quiet reminder of the love that had once been, and of the love that would continue to be. The evening sky had grown darker, the soft glow of the lamps in the room now casting long shadows across the walls. The old man leaned back in his chair, his eyes resting on the flickering light, the gentle hum of the night slowly surrounding him. There was a certain calmness to the world at this hour, a quiet peace that seemed to settle into the bones of everything around him. He couldn't help but smile softly, remembering how his own parents had spoken of their lives, their struggles, and the love they had shared. He had grown up with those stories, hearing them over and over, as if they were a part of the fabric of his being, woven into the very core of who he was. But tonight, for some reason, those stories felt different as he listened to the children's laughter and the sounds of life filling the house. Something inside him stirred. Maybe it was the moonlight, or maybe it was the quiet solitude that had settled over him. But the sense of time seemed more palpable than ever. Life was so fleeting, so fragile, and yet, in a strange way, it was eternal. The memories of those who had passed, the lives that had been lived, all of it seemed to converge into this single moment, this quiet evening, where the world continued to turn, the days continued to pass, but the love that had once been shared never truly disappeared. His gaze shifted back to the window, where the tombstone in the garden now stood in the soft moonlight, its silhouette sharp and unmoving against the backdrop of the night. He had spent so many years walking past it, hardly giving it a second thought. It had been just another stone, another marker of a time long past. But tonight, as he looked at it, he saw something different. It wasn't just a tombstone anymore. It was a symbol, a connection to something greater than himself. It was a reminder that life, in all its fleetingness, left something behind, a legacy of love, of memories, of moments that could never be erased. As the clock ticked on, the old man stood up slowly, his joints creaking with the effort, and walked towards the window. He placed his hand gently against the cool glass, looking out at the tombstone, his thoughts deepening. There were so many things he wished he had said, so many moments he had missed. But now, it seemed that the past was always with him. The people he had loved, the memories they had shared, they were all still here, in the house, in the garden, in the stories that were told over and over. And as long as those memories lived on, as long as the love was passed down, nothing could ever truly be forgotten. The moonlight bathed the tombstone in its soft glow, and for a moment, the old man could almost hear the whispers of the past, the voices of those who had gone before him, their laughter, their voices, their stories alive. In the stillness of the night, and in that silence, he felt a sense of peace, a connection to something greater than himself. A feeling that transcended time and space. The stillness of the night seemed to stretch on forever. The only sound, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze outside. The old man's mind wandered back through the years, the faces of loved ones flickering in his memory like soft, ethereal images. He thought of the laughter that had filled this very room years ago, the joyful noise of children running about, their energy contagious. And now, all of that had faded, leaving behind only the gentle hum of life, the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. He often wondered how time could feel so swift, yet so cruel, as it stripped away all that was familiar, all that was dear. But in that moment, looking out at the tombstone bathed in moonlight, the old man felt a strange comfort. It was as if he had come full circle, like the past, the present, and the future were all intertwined in that one moment, in that one quiet house. There was no escaping the passage of time, no way to turn back the clock. But perhaps that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was to cherish what had been, to hold dear the memories that had shaped him, to understand that love and connection were timeless. As he gazed at the tombstone, a sudden thought struck him. It wasn't the stone itself that held meaning, but the stories it represented, the stories of a life well lived, a life of love and kindness. The tombstone, like all things, was a marker, a signpost pointing to something greater. It was a reminder that life, no matter how fleeting, had purpose. The love we give, the memories we make, and the connections we forge, they are all part of a larger tapestry, one that stretches beyond our individual lives, one that lives on in the hearts and minds of those we leave behind. The old man smiled softly to himself, a sense of peace washing over him. He wasn't sure how much longer he had. how many more nights like this one he would experience. But for the first time in a long while, he felt content. The weight of the years seemed lighter somehow, as if the burdens of the past had been lifted, leaving only the present, the memories, and the love that had been shared. It was enough. As the night deepened, the moonlight casting a silvery glow over the garden, the old man's gaze remained fixed on the tombstone, now just a quiet silhouette. In the dark, he could almost hear the faint rustle of the leaves in the trees, as if the earth itself were whispering, carrying with it the secrets of those who had gone before. In that moment, he felt no fear of what lay beyond, no dread of the unknown. Instead, he felt a profound connection to everything that had come before him, every person, every memory, every fleeting moment. The tombstone, now weathered and worn by the years, was a testament not to death, but to life, a life well lived, full of love and loss, joy and sorrow. And just as the moonlight touched it now, it would continue to shine long after the old man had gone, a quiet reminder of the love that endured. For he knew now that life was not defined by the years one lived, but by the love one gave, the kindness one showed, and the connections one forged along the way. He stood up slowly, his joints creaking with the familiar ache of age, and took one last look at the tombstone. It seemed to glow in the quiet darkness, its inscription no longer important, for the true message lay in the love it represented, in the history it had witnessed, in the hearts that had remembered. With a deep breath, he turned back toward the warmth of the house, the memories of the past gently folding into the present. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own joys and sorrows, but tonight he would rest easy. He had made his peace, and with it, he knew that the love he had given would never be forgotten. As he closed the door behind him, the last trace of moonlight faded from the tombstone, and the house fell into quiet, peaceful darkness. And somewhere in the stillness, a voice seemed to whisper through the years, a voice that spoke not of endings, but of beginnings, of lives that intertwined, of stories that would continue to be told long after the last breath was taken.